When engaging with any artistic medium, I think it's important to remember to engage with works that vary in quality. I'm not advocating exclusively engaging with dog shit, but also I don't think it's healthy to engage with genre defining masterpieces exclusively. Sometimes, the really interesting stuff can be found in those 7 out of 10s that you know aren't perfect, but you're willing to accept the flaws in them. I think it shows maturity when you can acknowledge the issues with something but still declare your love for it, which is exactly what I want to do today. I just want to go over some games that I think are 7 out of 10s, but I still love them regardless. This video contains spoilers for the following games: Dark Souls 2 and infamous Second Son. The first game that I want to talk about today is Avalanche Studios' Mad Max game from 2015. On the surface, Mad Max looks like a really basic Ubisoft-esque open-world action game. And to be honest, it is. The only unique selling point of the game is that it's Mad Max themed, complete with the Mad Max franchise's emphasis on cars and weirdos. I've always thought that the Mad Max franchise was prime video game adaptation material, and it surprises me that there haven't been more attempts at a Mad Max game beyond this one and a random forgotten NES game. The reason I have such an infatuation with this game is pretty simple. I absolutely adore the atmosphere and the vibes of this game. Something that I've learned about myself over the years is that I am a sucker for vibes, especially if they're enough to my liking that they can carry a whole game for me, and Mad Max has vibes in spades. The game really captures the isolating and desolate feeling of the world of Mad Max, the rolling sand dunes interrupted by the decrepit ruins of former civilization. Getting to Dasstown is one of the main goals of the story early on, and I love how it's always looming off in the horizon, polluting the sky with ominous black smoke, and how as you get closer and closer to it, the world becomes more hostile, as you're forced to confront what little is left of humanity in such a bitter and lawless place. The combat is also one of my favorite parts of the game. It's your standard Batman Arkham combat, with punches and counters and such, but it feels so much more weighty thanks to Max's absolutely brutal fighting style. The combat is so good that it makes me wish that the game featured some sort of arena you can endlessly engage with, because it's just so much damn fun. You can feel every broken bone, cracked rib, and shattered skull that you hand out to your foes. When I said that the game is isolating and desolate, it's to the game's benefit and detriment. There really isn't a whole lot to do in the world beyond the standard open world activities such as base assaults and radio towers, although in this game they're balloons that you fly into the sky, but they serve the same purpose as a radio tower in a Far Cry game. The story is pretty forgettable, with not much anything interesting going on. The only part that really ever caught my attention was the weird mysterious guy that upgrades Max while also asking him vague questions about his previous life. Other than that, there really isn't much in the way of character in the game. It's just you in the world. And the moment-to-moment gameplay loop of driving around doing your usual Mad Max thing, the game really shines. But once you get out of that loop, it all kind of falls apart. The mild survival mechanics where you have to keep up with your car's gas and the water in your canteen become obsolete pretty quickly because you never really lack for either. I think my dream Mad Max game would have this game's core gameplay, but in a much smaller and more detailed world with a heavier emphasis on survival. I have a really fond memory from when I first started playing the game, where I ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere, so I just had to abandon my car and journey across the starting area of the game on foot until I found gas. I thought it was a really organic moment that becomes impossible pretty early on just because of how easy it is to get gas. Pretty much every enemy stronghold has several gas canisters just lying around for you. But despite my nitpicks, I really do truly love this game. It's one of the few games I'll just turn on to just be in the world, listening to the roars of my car's engine and looking off into the horizon at this game's frankly beautiful skyboxes. This might be the most controversial opinion that I have in this video because of how divisive this game is. I think people are going to be arguing about Dark Souls 2 until the end of time. I think that most of the complaints about this game are valid, be it the horrendous enemy placement, the quantity over quality approach to bosses, the janky animations, the sometimes downright terrible level design, adaptability. I think they're all valid complaints, and I even agree with them. But if I think the vibes of Mad Max boost the experience for me, then Dark Souls 2 is carried by its vibes. This might sound a little weird, but something that I really admire about Dark Souls 2 is about how it's so unashamedly a video game. It kind of feels like playing a fake video game that you would see a kid playing in the background of a TV show. Everything about it, from the enemies to the locations, it just really screams video game. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me, which is what's really important here. Dark Souls 2 has my favorite story of the Souls trilogy, and maybe even in all of FromSoft's modern catalog. A big part of the story of Drangleic is how the age that the game takes place in is so long after the time of Dark Souls 1 that most of its iconic characters and settings of that game have been lost to time and scarcely remembered. Sure, you can find weapons and armor and even characters from Dark Souls 1, but for the most part, Dark Souls 2 is its own thing. I think it's really bold of a sequel to eschew a lot of the iconic imagery of its insanely popular predecessor. The game's main story, the tale of King Vendrick and his manipulation and betrayal by his queen Nishandra while he was just trying to find a cure for the undead curse that plagued his kingdom, is a really unique story that ties in well with the Dark Souls series' the overall themes of the cyclical nature of life, violence, and kingdoms. Despite the extremely depressing setting of a kingdom past its prime, besieged by an onslaught of its own citizens being turned into mindless undead, I think Dark Souls 2 is the most hopeful of the trilogy. This isn't a knock against Dark Souls 1 or 2, but the NPCs in this game feel like they're just waiting for the inevitable end of the world, which they technically are, but everybody in those games is just wallowing in their own sadness. The world of Dark Souls 2 doesn't feel totally lost. I feel like, however minute, there's still a chance that it isn't totally over for the land of Drangleic. Although, given the nature of the Souls trilogy, and the fact that Dark Souls 3 exists, kind of disproves my delusional hope. Dark Souls 2 also introduced a lot of really interesting gameplay ideas, and some were even later reiterated upon in later FromSoft games. Power stancing, hexes, bonfire aesthetics, unique enemies and items on New Game Plus, and the torch mechanic, just to name a few. Not all of these ideas are given equal opportunity to shine, but I won't fault the game for trying something new and failing. There are so many cool and unique items in this game that it offers a dizzying amount of replayability. Even though earlier I complained about the quantity over quality approach to the bosses of Dark Souls 2, the game still has some of my favorite fights in the series. Looking Glass Knight, Fume Knight, Sir Lon, and Vendrick, just to name a few. Vendrick in particular, not because of the challenge that the boss presents, because he is ultimately pretty easy, but just because of the storytelling power that he possesses. I've only ever played the Scholar the First Sin version of the game, but I think the idea of an alternate version of the game, with its enemies and items in different places, is super cool. My only complaint about it is that I wish there was a way to switch between the original version and the Scholar version of the game, because the Scholar edition is the only edition of the game that I've ever played. Dark Souls 2 is not the first Souls game that I've played, nor is it my favorite, but it still regardless holds a special place in my heart for just how damn unique it is, and how unafraid it is to be unique. A big complaint that I have about Dark Souls 3 is just how much the game is reiterating, reminiscent, or even just straight up reusing characters, enemies, weapons, armor, and even entire locations from Dark Souls 1. It feels like they're just trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, instead of trying something new. I am a very big fan of XCOM. I have about 250 hours in XCOM 2. I've done about 4 or 5 complete playthroughs of the game, only on Commander difficulty though. I'm not cut out for legendary Iron Man runs, at least not yet. Sometimes though, I want to play something XCOM-like, but I don't want to play XCOM itself. It's weird, I'm sure you can relate, but I can't explain the feeling. I've tried a bunch of different games to fill the void, and only one game has ever successfully managed to give me the same feeling that XCOM 2 does, and that game is Marvel Midnight Suns. I guess it adds up, since this game is made by Firaxis, which is the same studio that does XCOM. Maybe they're the only ones that have the secret sauce. But focusing on Midnight Suns, what do I like about this game? It's not the story, which feels like nothing really matters because it's focused on a custom protagonist and their mother, who as far as I know have never been mentioned in any other form of Marvel media before or after the release of this game, and also has pretty low stakes and tension despite being about the world potentially being destroyed by a demon apocalypse. I'm not a stickler for graphics, but this game is really ugly at times. In moment-to-moment gameplay it's fine, but when you stop for a minute and really look at some of the character models and environments up close, they're lacking, to say the least. You'd think Marvel, being the infinite money machine that they are, would want their characters to always look as good as possible. The reason I love this game so much is mainly just because of how damn good the gameplay is. I could literally waste an entire day just doing random general missions, just so I can indulge myself in the combat. Combat in this game is a deck-building, turn-based strategy affair. Every character has a deck of cards that all have different moves on them. You can earn and equip new moves by unlocking chests that you earn at the end of missions. Different characters specialize in different things, and their respective gameplay styles are all true to the character. For example, Captain America specializes in taunting enemies and building up block to tank damage for his teammates. Doctor Strange is a support character that specializes in generating heroism points for the team to use stronger moves, while also providing support in other ways, such as granting extra card plays or concealing and healing teammates. I really enjoy how almost all of the characters play, with two small exceptions that I won't go into because it would waste too much time. Midnight Suns is a prime example of just how much good gameplay can carry the entire experience of a game, even if everything else is lacking. The gameplay isn't the only thing I enjoy though. Despite my previous gripes with the main plot, the writing is actually pretty good, better than it has any right to be. One of the main parts of the gameplay loop is hanging out with the heroes in the Midnight Suns as your custom protagonist, kind of like Persona. Also like Persona, you have a friendship meter that you fill by hanging out with the heroes, gaining different buffs and bonuses the more you hang out with them. Each hero has a miniature arc that they go through over the course of your friendship with them, and they're all surprisingly well written. I ended up caring about the outcome of each and every hero, their personal struggles, opinions on current events, and generally just hanging out with them just to see what they would say. I probably got way more into it than a lot of people did, but it's a shining part of the game for me. I couldn't imagine the game without it. When Midnight Suns is good, it's so good that it makes me sad that this game is likely never going to get a sequel because of how poorly it performed. I'd love a sequel that reiterates and improves on the groundwork that this game laid out, adding new characters and moves and new ways to enjoy the combat. I'm glad that Firaxis also recognized how good the combat is by adding extremely difficult post-game missions that drive your strategic thinking abilities to their limits. Here's to wishful thinking that someday we will see this game again, or it'll at least be shown the proper love that it wasn't shown when it came out. Out of any game that I talk about in this video, Midnight Suns is the one that I recommend the most. If it has all caught your interest, I implore you to check it out. Speaking of things that were never shown love when they came out, we have our next topic. I don't hold any illusions about Battleborn. Even if Overwatch never happened, I don't think this game was ever bound for more than a cult following. The game was advertised extremely poorly, to the point that nobody really knew what kind of game it was. And even for those that did figure it out, it's not a game for everybody. MOBAs are a commitment. Do you know how hard it is to get a MOBA player to try a new game after they've already sunk hundreds, if not thousands of hours into their favorite game? Shooter fans and newcomers to the genre were probably put off by all the MOBA stuff. People that wanted single-player content were probably burned by the game's story mode being 8 lackluster and unmemorable side missions, with additional single-player content being locked behind a season pass. All in all, it's kind of a game for nobody, except for those that were able to claw through the confusing nature of the game and find what I think is a diamond in the rough. Although the diamond is kind of rough too. I've had my time in Overwatch. I have about 150 hours as a proud Junkrat main, but Battleborn always somehow managed to hold my attention more than Overwatch ever could. I can't exactly articulate why, especially considering this was almost 10 years ago at this point. My tastes have changed so much since then, and even more since the time that has passed since the game was shut down in early 2021. I have to ask myself, would I still enjoy Battleborn if I were able to play today? To maintain the spirit of the video, I will say yes. Despite my evolving tastes and my growing disdain for Gearbox writing, I think I would still enjoy Battleborn because it was plainly and simply a fun game with a cool art style and some unique ideas. The only thing I can really do now is look fondly on the time that I had with the game, since it's been rendered unplayable for almost 5 years now. There is a mod for PC that allows you to access the single-player content, which I think is good for the sake of preservation, but people shouldn't have to resort to modding to be able to play a game that they paid money for. Publishers are so quick to throw away their less than successful titles. It's a spit in the face to the developers that put blood, sweat, and tears into these games, only for their hard work to be thrown out like garbage because it didn't become the next big thing. And it's disrespectful to the customers that spent their hard-earned money to buy this game, and maybe even put dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of hours of their time into this game, only for all that effort and passion to be rendered for naught at the whim of a shareholder that's probably never even played a video game. Let's get back on topic though. I honestly was struggling to write about Battleborn itself, because most everything I remember about it isn't related to the gameplay, but instead everything else surrounding it. The characters, the art style, the sound design, I remember all that, but it's been over 5 years now since I last played the game, so my memory is a bit fuzzy when it comes to it. Battleborn had a wide roster of 30 characters, with about every archetype you can think of for a hero shooter being represented, and for the most part, I enjoyed playing all of these different characters. I obviously had characters that I preferred, like Ernest, Oscar Mike, Cleese, but I played a wide variety of the roster, which is something that I can't say for many other games. I don't really have an explanation as to why I liked so much of the roster, but I'll just say it was because I enjoyed controlling them. Everybody played differently and felt distinct. I liked the cartoony art style, and I liked the game's attempt to feel like a Saturday morning cartoon, as scarce as they were across the game. It was a game that I felt like the developers were obviously very passionate for, but it wasn't flawless. Like I said, the single-player content was pretty lackluster, only being 8-hour-long story missions with tedious objectives and annoying dialogue. I did like the DLC story missions that they added on later though. The main goal was to replay them multiple times for new rewards and challenge, with new events, enemies, and dialogue occurring on each new replay of the mission. I thought it was a cool way to give these missions replayability, and they were much shorter than the base game story missions, giving them much needed brevity, and it being a nice break from getting your ass kicked in the multiplayer. I even had a friend group that I would play the game with and grind these DLC missions with, but I unfortunately don't talk to anybody from that group anymore. We all just went our separate ways after the game was shut down. I have a lot of fond memories of Battleborn, but the time I look back on the most was shortly after they announced they were in the process of sunsetting the game. It was late 2019 when they announced the game would be delisted from digital storefronts, and the servers would be shut down in early 2021. When I heard this news, I took it upon myself to try and get all of the trophies for the game before they shut the servers down, because I was in the midst of my trophy hunter phase. So over the course of the next couple of months, I would play Battleborn on and off and grind out the platinum. The biggest obstacle I faced was the lore challenges and their associated trophies. Every single character on the roster had what was called lore challenges, which were random challenges associated with doing specific tasks on a character, and your reward was a piece of the character's backstory. It was a cool way to incentivize players to learn their characters and reward dedication. Every character had 5 lore challenges, and there was a trophy for completing each character's lore challenge. The problem is that these challenges were not created equal. Some were as simple as deal X amount of damage with Y ability, or play on the same team as X character. To some, that was just downright absurd. The ones that instantly come to mind to me were for Kelvin and Toby, who both had challenges that would bug, and would refuse to properly count even if you did the requirements for them. It took so much time to do these challenges, even when I would boost them with random people, which I often had to do, because there weren't enough active players to just do these challenges naturally. After several months of dedication, in the summer of 2020, I had finally earned Battleborn's Platinum, and all I had to show for it was a trophy for a game that nobody really cared about. It would be shut down in about 7 months' time. But I still looked fondly on the time I spent doing that Platinum, because I had fun doing it, because I thought Battleborn was a fun game. I hope somehow, one day, there's a way for the game to get revived, and if that ever happens, I will be there day one, and still get pissed at how fucking busted Galileo was. I've gotten all the games that I really wanted to talk about out of the way, but there are still a few that I want to mention, but I don't have as much to say about them as the previously mentioned games, so we're going to do a bit of a lightning round. This is a more recent addition to my 7 out of 10 Hall of Fame, as I've only just recently gotten into One Piece last year. For anybody curious, I've made it all the way to Dressrosa in the manga, but as of right now I'm taking a break from reading so I don't burn myself out. Pirate Warriors 4 is pretty much what's advertised, a One Piece style Dynasty Warriors game, and I think One Piece lends itself really well to Warriors style combat. I don't think this type of combat is for everybody. It's honestly pretty shallow and more about the spectacle of beating up a million guys at once with increasingly extravagant attacks. I've added Pirate Warriors to my rotation of chill games. Whenever I need to zone out, I put this game on in one of my playlists on and just disassociate, despite how involved the combat can get at times. I don't think this game is for everybody, not only because of the acquired taste of Musou combat, but because of how heavily geared towards One Piece fans this game is. I don't think anybody is going to get into One Piece because of Pirate Warriors 4. Part of the spectacle is seeing all of your favorite characters kicking ass and seeing iconic attacks in motion. My personal favorite character to play as is Kid, despite me not really caring for him as a character in the manga. I think his gimmick, though, of having to build up trash arms for stronger and bigger attacks is really cool. I think, though, my main complaint about this game is how honestly low production it is for the story mode, and the upgrade system feels very tacked on. The story mode is just a rehash of some of the major arcs in the manga, such as Alabasta, Water 7, and Marineford. All of the cutscenes look super cheap though. Most of the non-animated ones, you're just watching two models recite dialogue from the manga at each other, and it's super unflattering. The upgrade system feels really redundant. I don't know if this is how they do it in other Warriors games, because my only other exposure to Warriors games is Persona 5 Strikers. Aside from the upgrades that give you new special moves or new routes of your main combo, all of the upgrades feel really pointless. It's all insanely minute stat upgrades to health or damage, which I never really feel the difference in power because of just how incremental the upgrades are. Despite these gripes though, I do really still enjoy this game, mainly just because I've become such a sucker for One Piece. This is a really oddball choice, but I don't know when else I'm ever going to talk about this game. Zero Time Dilemma is the third and final game in the Nonary Games trilogy, and it's definitely a game that I've played. I'm being facetious though. I do enjoy this game, but it gets blown out of the water by both of its predecessors, which isn't entirely its fault. This game had a very troubled development, with it being basically killed and resurrected at a later date. Zero Time Dilemma abandons the visual novel style storytelling of the previous games and goes for a more cutscene-oriented way of telling the story, and I think the game suffers greatly from it. When you're playing a visual novel, I think your imagination does a lot of the heavy lifting and makes the story feel more alive than what it is in reality, which is just a text box. But with the way this game does its cutscenes, you watch everything play out and you really wish that you weren't. Everybody and everything looks so stiff, like you're watching mannequins learn to be human. I also think this game has the weakest story of the trilogy. I still liked it, and it left me scratching my head as much as the previous games did, although maybe not for the reasons that the game intended. The thing that I can give ZTD the most credit for, though, is I think it has the best puzzles of the trilogy. I thought the series after that point had an issue with balancing its puzzles. 999's puzzles were way too easy and barely required any thinking, and for the most part, Virtue's Last Reward had the same issues too, but some puzzles, especially near the end of the story, were way too abstract, and the solutions made no sense. This might just be a massive self-report on me, though, who knows? I'm not very smart. I think ZTD hit the best balance, though, between being just abstract enough to require you to think, but also not being so out of the box with the solution that you would never reasonably figure it out. My personal favorite puzzles include the rec room and the transporter room. This game is my least favorite of the trilogy, but I still enjoyed it, and even if I didn't, it's by far the shortest game of the series, so at least there's not much suffering. If you're ever in need of a story that'll leave you scratching your head and also full of random trivia about social experiments, I highly recommend the Nonary Games trilogy. Also, Carlos is my GOAT, and I made a Paul custom for him in Tekken 8. My love for Dying Light is in much of the same vein as my love for the Mad Max game. I adore the vibes, and I enjoy being in the world, despite how miserable it is. The story of Dying Light is laughably bad, everybody knows that by now, but the gameplay is just so damn good that even to this day I still find myself loading the game up just to run around and fuck with zombies. The parkour and combat in this game are so good that they have yet to one-up it in another Dying Light game. Beyond the gameplay though, the city of Haran is one of my favorite level designs in any game ever. There are so many opportunities for the players to express themselves through the ways that they explore the world, and I feel like even now, almost 10 years after I started playing Dying Light, I find something new in the city every time I boot the game up, no matter how small or minute it may be. It really is a feeling that can't be replicated, and I adore Dying Light with all of my heart. Although to this day I still can't beat the Bozak Horde DLC. Maybe I'm just bad. In a just world, we would be on Infamous 8 or 9 by now. I love the Infamous series so much, and I wish Sucker Punch would do something with it instead of letting it stagnate like so many other Sony and PlayStation properties are. Second Son may not have the surprisingly good story of Infamous 2, but it makes up for it in what is, in my opinion, the best gameplay in the series and some of the best movement in any game I've ever played. It's so satisfying to get into a good rhythm of traversing the world with the different power types. Neon's always been my favorite power, both in terms of combat and traversal. There's something so hypnotic about the lights mixed with the sound. It'll never not be satisfying to clip somebody in the head with a neon beam. Not all of the powers are created equal though. Concrete, which you earn in the final mission of the game while fighting the final boss, feels unfinished compared to the other three powers. It just doesn't feel as good to use in combat or in traversal as any of the other powers. Also, Delson Rowe is kind of a huge shithead, and I don't like him. Cole McGrath shits all over him. For the final game in this video, let's talk about South Park: The Fractured Butthole, which I will be referring to as Butthole for short, because fuck you. I think that both of the South Park RPGs, Stick of Truth and Butthole, are quintessential 7 out of 10 games. I've always preferred Butthole over Stick of Truth, which is apparently a bit of a hot take. I've seen so many people say that they prefer the former over the latter, which I don't really understand. The combat in Butthole is so good that it makes Stick of Truth null in my eyes. I've never gone back for another playthrough of Stick of Truth over the years, but I've done like 4 playthroughs of Butthole. Much like Midnight Suns, the combat of Butthole is so good that it makes me sad that it'll probably never get reiterated and built upon in a proper sequel, because they decided to do that weird-ass Snow Day game that nobody asked for, instead of another RPG. Butthole is honestly not that replayable, which I think is a testament to how good the combat is that I've done as many playthroughs of it as I have. I never thought it was particularly challenging either, until I played the DLC for the first time a few years ago. Did you know this game had DLC? It did, and it's surprisingly good. It's hard as fuck though, so I would recommend it to you if you also thought this game was not particularly challenging. My main complaint is probably the lack of replayability. There's not really anything new that you can do on subsequent playthroughs of Butthole. You kind of do the same thing every time. The only really different thing you can do is pick different classes at various points in the game when you are given the choice of a new one. But it all becomes moot when Timmy grants you all of the classes in the later parts of the story. Also, despite my love of the combat, it can get kind of repetitive, especially when you learn what's good. Especially if you have the DLC, which grants you access to the Netherborn class, which is by far the best class in the game, bar none. The gear system that replaces the equipable badges from Stick of Truth is also pretty lame. I never really took into account the individual pros and cons of one gear piece versus another. It just becomes a game of equip whatever has the highest number, with the only real thought being in when you unlock the epic gear slots that grant unique bonuses for each individual gear piece. Other than that though, I'm running out of things to say about this game, and also things to say in general, so this is going to be a really sudden and abrupt ending, but I'm ending the video right here, before I say something stupid. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, do all that junk that YouTubers say to do, and let me know what your favorite 7 out of 10 game is in the comments. Good night.